It's good day to brew, baby. What is up, YouTube? It's your boy Millsy, back with Hometown Commander, back for another episode of $50 Upgrades, the show where I take a Precon and give you my suggested $50 upgrades for it. And today, we're looking at the Final Fantasy Counter Blitz Precon, headed up by Titus Yuna's Guardian. A 3-mana, banned 3/3 creature that says at the beginning of combat on your turn, you can move a counter from a creature you control to another creature you control. And whenever one or more creatures you control with counters on them hit a player in combat, you can draw a card and proliferate. You only do that once per turn, though. Titus does a really good job at paying off counters in a lot of ways, moving them around, getting more counters onto things, and proliferate's such a fun mechanic that we can take advantage of. For my $50 of upgrades, like we do on the show, the goal and the intention is to try to pump as much synergy and as much of taking these strategies that are in the deck and making them better. Not every Precon that Wizards releases is perfect out of the box. In fact, there are none of them that are. And a lot of times they have random cards thrown in and other things. And our goal here is just to try to add more synergy, add more of the things we want to see, so we better see that in our games. The goal is not to make it out of bracket 2, but just to make the deck just that little bit better so we can get a little bit more consistent. And then at the end, I'll give you some suggestions on maybe how I would keep going from here if you're looking to give up a little bit more to upgrade the deck a little bit further. But thank you so much to the channel members. Thank you so much for supporting the channel. If you're interested in seeing all of our videos just a teeny bit early, check it out down below. I think the biggest thing the deck's missing to me is a cross-section of cards I like to call like counter enablers. You have things like Abzan Battle Priest and Falconer that give all your creatures with counters on them a certain ability. Battle Priest gives lifelink, Falconer gives flying. We have things like Dustshell Crawler in the deck, which gives all of our creatures trample, but there's more than just that. I think these are the kind of creatures that are really useful. They have the Outlast ability to put a counter on themselves if you want them to, but our deck has plenty of other ways that we're going to have it to pass counters out, so we're not as worried about that. Astral Cornucopia, like Everflowing Chalice that's in the Precon, are both artifacts that come in with a certain number of charge counters on them and add mana equal to the charge counters. Cornucopia adds colored mana, whereas Everflowing Chalice adds colorless mana. But I think the Cornucopia is still very worth it. It comes down for 3 mana with 1 charge counter on it, and Titus should start proliferating it right into a nice mana rock for us. Brokers Ascendancy just passes a counter out to every one of our creatures on our end step. Really great when we start having abilities that care about counters being on our things and even protection spells that do that. Danny Pink is a great addition here, giving all of our creatures, whenever one or more counters are put on it for the first time each turn, draw a card. This is just going to lead to that proliferate, hopefully every turn with Titus, leading to just some great card draw for us. The deck has some decent removal, but I think it's time to add some more with something like Generous Gift. Generous Gift is one of the best removal spells out there because it can hit any permanent. Yes, your opponent gets a 3/3 elephant for it, but being able to take out anything your opponent could have at the right time is really useful, and that's what we want out of our removal. Infectious Bite is one of a couple cards we can add to start threatening our opponents with poison counters. I remember the way the poison counter mechanic works is if an opponent were to get to 10 poison counters, they lose the game. So the idea with Infectious Bite is you get it started giving everybody 1, and then try to proliferate them up to 10. Innkeeper's Talent lets us pass out a counter at the start of each of our combats. Level 2 gives all of our permanents with counters on them ward 1 for that little bit of protection. And then level 3 gives us the ability to double the number of counters that we put on permanents or players, which is a nice ability, not only if you want to care about the the poison counter type thing, but because when you're proliferating, now you're adding 2 instead of 1, right? So you can really start to grow your board even more. Kutzil to me makes a ton of sense. Your opponents can't cast spells during your turn, and whenever one or more creatures we control with power greater than their base power hit a player in combat, we draw a card. Remember that counters will do that for us, so Kutzil should allow us to grab a couple cards every combat, hopefully. Mutational Advantage is one of the ways we can protect our board. It says permanents we control with counters on them gain hexproof and indestructible in a turn. So here's your potential board wipe or single target removal, and then protection. And then we prevent all damage that would be dealt to them this turn and proliferate. This could also be used defensively if you want to, make some big blocks and try to knock your opponent's creatures out, right? There's a lot of options there. Prologue to Phyresis is the other half of Infectious Bite of the 2 cards that give everybody a poison counter. If we can make that happen. If you're interested in doing more of that, There are more creatures that have things like Toxic or Infect that will allow you to get more poison counters on your opponents, and that's a viable win con for us since we are going to be able to proliferate very easily. Recon Craft Theta comes in and makes a token that should be able to crew it soon, but whenever it attacks, you just proliferate. So this gives us another opportunity to proliferate every turn, and the more proliferating we're doing a turn, the better over it all is, right? More counters, more opportunities for more things to happen, and just bigger creatures overall. Ripples of Potential is another protection spell for us. We proliferate, then choose any number of permanents we control that had a counter, put them on this way, and phase out. Remember that when a permanent phase out, it's treated as though it isn't there until our next turn. It doesn't leave the battlefield, so we're not going to get any ETB abilities from our creatures. But they basically are just acting like they're not there. So this is going to protect from things like exile board wipes, like Farewell. This is going to protect from destruction. This is just going to protect from so many things. Could protect from them bouncing back to our hand. Not only that, but Ripples also proliferates, so we get all that value on it as well. We're adding another secondary win con in Simic Ascendancy. It says whenever one or more +1/+1 counters are put on a creature we control, we put that many growth counters on Simic Ascendancy. In the beginning of our upkeep, if it has 20 or more growth counters on it, you win the game. It's a pretty easy thing to accomplish if we can get it down early enough. And then remember, if we have anything that doubles the amount of counters we put on our things, like that Innkeeper's talent, it will actually double the amount of growth counters going on to Simic Ascendancy, right? Helping it get up a little bit quicker. Staff of Completion may look odd, but it's really here for its 2 middle abilities. Pay 2 life to add a mana of any color, or pay 3 life to proliferate. Having another way to proliferate, especially one that doesn't cost mana, is huge, because then it's going to allow us to proliferate at the right time, even instant speed, to get value on our things, right, and allow us to continue that proliferate train going. Tekuthal in Query Dominus is one of the horror creatures that was in Phyrexia All Be One. It says if we proliferate twice instead. This is huge, right? Because now Titus is proliferating twice, and all their proliferate sources are. The reason this works with Titus is because it doesn't allow his ability to re-trigger again. It's just saying, oh, you're going to proliferate? Do it twice instead. So it's really helpful, because then anything that proliferates on our side of the board is going to help us proliferate twice. And then we can make Tekuthal indestructible by paying 3 mana, removing 3 counters from among our creatures, artifacts, or planeswalkers, and we give it indestructible. Now, if you've never seen Phyrexian mana, that blue symbol there means that you can either play a blue mana or 2 life. Or if it's just a mana and 4 life, we could make Tekuthal indestructible. And that'll certainly help keep it around so we can keep proliferating more and more. Wave Goodbye should be a one-sided board wipe to add alongside Damning Verdict that's in the deck. It just says, return each creature without a counter on it to its owner's hand. So here you go. You can hopefully just mass bounce a bunch of creatures, right? Clear your way for a nice big attack. And then Zimone, at the beginning of combat on our turn, we get to pass out a couple counters to creatures we control. And then for 2 mana, you can tap or just double the number of counters on each on up to 2 creatures or artifacts. The artifact thing, right, works really nice with Astral Cornucopia or Ever-Flowing Chalice that's in the deck, right? But we can also pick creatures, right, doubling their counters and making them bigger. I think the goal, as you can see here, is to really pay off those counters and make our creatures bigger and better along the way. But as far as what we're going to remove, I've said it before in every one of my Precon upgrade videos, the intention of the removals here is I'm not saying these are the worst cards in the deck. I'm not saying that they're worth being in the deck. I'm not saying that you should automatically take these out. These were just the cards I chose to take out in order to upgrade the deck and work towards it. That being said, as we go through the removals, I'll mention the cards maybe I think are worth bringing back in or maybe worth thinking about. But you have to remember that not even a Precon that Wizard sells you is going to be perfect, and there's always ways we can improve the deck. I like the idea of Blitzball Stadium. It comes in and lets you put a counter on a bunch of creatures, and then draw you some cards when a creature hits, depending on how many different types of counters are on it. I like the idea of this card. I just think there's other ways we can better support our archetype with other things. Generous Patron is another really interesting one. When it comes in, it supports, and then whenever one or more creatures are put on a creature, counters are put on a creature we don't control, you draw a card. Note that support doesn't say your creature, so you can technically support and put a counter on an opponent's creature, but I just don't love the idea of it. Same thing with Guado here, investigating each turn that we put a counter on a creature. I like the idea of having a way to sack a token to draw a card, but I just think there's more we can do with our counters there. Same thing with something like Path of Discovery. I love Path of Discovery. Explorer is such a fun mechanic. It can help you dig through your deck, getting counters on creatures. But I was trying to bring some more counters matters support, and I think we have even other ways to get counters on all of our creatures instead of just one. And so that was my main philosophy there. I think Scholar New Horizons is an interesting card, removing counters from a permanent we control to go get a planes. I think there's just, again, more things we can do with it, even though I like the idea of it. The summon creatures are cool. They're just not really what I want out of here. Again, I love the new art for Sunscorch Region. I think it's really cool. I like the idea that it grows and we gain life whenever our opponents cast spells, but I think there's just more things that we can do to get more value out of the things in our deck. And then same thing with Tireless Tracker. I love the idea of this kind of a little bit of an investigate thing where, you know, when you sack clues, you get counters on it. But again, I think there's just better and more things that we can do for our game plan that better gets counters on all of our creatures and better pays off counters being on our creature. And there's way more we can do with our Battle Priest or Falconer style abilities. There's more that, you know, give your creatures abilities depending on whether or not they have counters on them. But all right, let's say we took our $50 upgrades here and we want to go a little bit further. Truthfully, the next card I would recommend for the deck, because I just couldn't fit it into the list due to its price, is Vorinclex Monstrous Raider. It's a big $50 card, but it's well worth it if you can see it in your games, because it says whenever we put a counter on a permanent or player, we get twice the number of them instead. And whenever an opponent would put a counter on a permanent or player, they get half that many rounded down. This should do a good job at trying to shut off our opponent's counter strategies for us, as well as making ours even better. Vorinclex is a really great card. Unfortunately, it just packs a pretty huge price tag, which can definitely be a hindrance to some people along the process. But I think a better one, although it's still kind of expensive, but I think it's a great value adder in itself, is Bristly Bill. This is a creature that puts a counter under creature we control whenever one of our lands come in. But for 5 mana, it can just double the counters on all creatures we control. Note that that's an instant speed ability, so we can do it at any time. And I just feel like this can really help us attacking when maybe a couple of our key creatures get through, and we choose to just double the counters to make the damage even more. Bristly Bill should also just help us pass out counters, right, with that landfall ability if we can see him early. And then Anduril's always an equipment I've liked. Whenever the equipped creature attacks, you put a counter on each creature you control. If you have the City's Blessing, so if you have 10 or more permanents and get the City's Blessing, then you put 2 on each creature instead. So you're really just adding a bunch of counters. Then when you hit, Titus is going to proliferate, right, getting more counters on them. So here's just the idea of more cards that are going to help, again, continue to push our game plan and do what we want to do. But I'd love to know, what do you think of my upgrades for Titus? Do you like some of these cards? Are you going to try putting some in your Precon? Are there any cards I removed that you think deserve to be in the deck? I'd love to chat with you down in the video below, and I will catch you on the next one.